Is this America's golden age, or is this the start of the end?
As a Trumper, that's essentially what I voted for. This new idea of succession, but hopefully that means prosperity and abundance for American people as well.
To some, he's that wrecking ball that, needed to smash that bloated government bureaucracy. To others, he's this embodiment of chaos and division.
Whenever I get to kind of the brass tacks of policies, foreign policy, economics, his relationship with the Fed, at the SEC, what he wants to do for entrepreneurship, tax plans, a lot of what people say come down to, they don't bring up policy, they don't bring up anything from a pragmatic standpoint, it's something about his character, or I just don't like him, or it's something about the way that he speaks.
America has been counted out before, time and time again, right? Every generation thinks that their problems are the problems that are gonna end or that will end the country. But if you see it, like, America has reinvented itself time and time again, right?
And I really want to gauge people's opinion about like the last 10 years. And if people are really feeling like, yeah, the last 10 years have been amazing, right? Like, who can say that?
Who's really running the country right now?
There's others that believe that he's just another, the other side of the coin, which is there's somebody else in power that put him in that place.
Are we uninstalling deep state and installing shadow governance? Who's the big guy?
We still don't know who's like absolutely in power. They're the men in pajamas that are running the world, and we only see kind of what we're meant to see.
Hey, Nix. Good to see you.
What's up, Deerin?
So let's talk about America today. One person we really can't escape these days is wherever you look, that person's just there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Taylor Swift.
Close, because his name also starts with T. Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say it, Nix. I don't think we haven't really discussed politics, right? But
Not really.
You've been a Trumper longer than, you're probably the longest running Trumper I know.
John Tobias probably beat me, but
John Tobias, you're right.
Yeah, our college friend. Yeah.
Yes, a college friend of ours. Yeah, he's been a Trumper for a long time. I actually remember we were just talking about this before we hit the record button on the day you told me that you were a Trump supporter, and this was when everyone that was supporting Trump was in the closet. No one really came out. It was not something that you discussed.
Totally.
For fear of getting canceled.
Yeah, there's still plenty of that going around, though. Yeah,
really,
it's not over yet. I mean, it's
I feel like the script is
like continue
flipped, completely flipped.
I mean, it's flipped because he's in power, but I'm saying you're still judged if you're on the other side, right? So that's just a thing.
Interesting. So here, you're not really like it. Almost feels like when you're having dinner or drinks with friends, and the comments around Trump now, I would say every other comment is, "Wow, he's a really smart guy. Like, he's a great negotiator. Have you read his book, The Art of the Deal? What he's doing right now with all these tariffs is exactly what he spoke about. Like, people are actually doing their research and really understanding the man and really getting to know him beyond the portrayal of the media. But America is going into this golden age, right? Is it really? I mean, he talks about this golden age, but is it the golden age, or is it a slow motion collapse of an empire? Like, what do you think is going on? Yeah. Let's break that down. What are your thoughts as a Trumper?
Okay,
who's been a Trumper for a long time, and now we're witnessing Trump 2.0. There's a lot of chaos, obviously, right? In the media, in government, in the markets, geopolitics. Like, so my question for you is this America's golden age, or is this the start of the end?
Super, super interesting. I will just take a step back because I feel like being labeled a Trumper has a lot to it. right? And it can be taken a lot of different ways, especially when you do live in America, to the degree in which you may just be pro America and
Mm.
support the ideals of what a golden age really represents in America, and who you believe stands for those ideals gets represented, and then it gets twisted and convoluted. But I'll tell you what I've seen over the last decade, which made it even hard to support somebody like Trump, is when you want to see change and you look at the bureaucracy and the corruption that exists within government, not just in third world countries, right, but everywhere, and then especially in America, that then percolates into the larger cultural zeitgeist in a very detrimental way. And what I'm talking about is kind of the cultural censorship and cancel culture, that if you didn't get behind this woke train, that you would be canceled. The critique and the overemphasis on, let's say, DEI and social policies and things like that. And if you essentially don't conform to
Diversity, equality, and
diversity, equity,
inclusion.
and inclusion, arguing that its emphasis on identity politics and the ideological pursuits of this entire paradigm, just flushing it like right at the center of absolutely everything that you do, and having its detrimental effects that we've seen. That's been kind of my observation of the last decade. And so what I'm seeing now is a shift in a representation that starts with the reclaiming of the freedom of speech, right? And so let's just start with like one issue at a time, and then I'll talk about macro. For somebody like Trump, and Elon is in this boat too, when he purchased Twitter and turned it into X, is the restoration of this robust freedom of speech as an essential ideology for essentially an innovative society, right? One where individuals can express themselves, different divergent views without fear of retribution, which is
Mm.
essentially in contrast to the perceived stifling of policies in the previous administration, from my perspective, right? And so when you say something like America is in a golden age, I would probably share the sentiment. And again, I am aware of my tunnel vision because I come from Silicon Valley, because I grew up in San Francisco, because I work in tech, that I essentially share the perspective of, like Mark Andreessen, for instance, and the rekindling of similarities in kind of Reagan's rhetoric in the Reagan era, when I was just a kid and was like too young to even think about the implications and the impact of how good things were, like growing up as a kid in the 80s. But, Reagan called it, it's morning again in America, right?
Mm.
And this encapsulated something in which the message of renewal and American optimism is here and forthright again, and seeing it as an era of revival, entrepreneurial spirit, which is what we talk a lot about on the show. And, what does that mean? It means you're bullish on American innovation. There's economic renewal through a ton of policy shifts. It's the empowerment of entrepreneurs and venture capital, emphasizing that, with favorable policies and deregulation of a lot of what's going on in the crypto space, for instance, it fuels startup activity, it impacts the markets, it creates new job opportunities, it creates jobs, it puts more money in people's pockets. And especially now with what you're seeing on his tax plan, hopefully that will start to have a ripple effect on the quality of people's lives. And then that's also encapsulated with kind of this new chapter of American exceptionalism, right? And hopefully that means better relationships with better foreign policy in general. And then we can obviously talk about Israel and Gaza, which tends to be a controversy. And I do have an opinion on that. But, before kind of like pulling on that thread, there's just kind of this idea and this moment where we can imagine and rebuild America's economic future with a lot of bold ideas and essentially just renewed energy. So that's what, as a Trumper, that what you would characterize as a Trumper, that's essentially what I voted for, is this new idea and this new paradigm of succession, but hopefully that means prosperity and abundance for American people as well.
Mm. So the way you characterize it is America first. It's not really an outright support for one individual. It's what that individual stands for, right? Which is, let's put America first above
Yeah,
everything else.
right.
I want to unpack something that you said. So there's a lot going on in this DEI space, right? So I understand that saying you're a Trumper today is like, you're into NFTs. Like it's trending right now, right? And some people will give you the nod approvingly. Others will roll their eyes so hard that they can even pull a muscle, right? But the reality is that the Trump brand is really not only about politics anymore. It's about what he represents to different people. I just saw something this morning how he's getting sued by, or could get sued by the federal government because the tee boxes in some of his golf courses is the crest of the American president. I don't know if you heard
Mhm.
this.
I have not. No.
Yeah, so I mean, it just hit the tape this morning. So the lines between government and business and entrepreneurship is really blurring. So and so to some, he's that wrecking ball that needed to smash that bloated government bureaucracy. To others, he's this embodiment of chaos and division. And to many, supporting him is less about him and more about rejecting the other narratives that are not putting America first. But the problem I find with this is that it's gotten, well, you have your finger on the pulse, but from here, it feels like it's gotten really tribal. I mean, you can't just say, I like some of what he does, but not everything without being thrown into, a MAGA bucket or to be a woke leftist. There's really no in between anymore. Like that nuance is completely gone. So my question is there even a way back from this hyper tribal era of politics, or is this just going to be the new normal?
Yeah, Darren, that's a super interesting one because you're basically focusing on what we're seeing in the cultural zeitgeist right now in America, which happens to be very tribal, and it feels like it's more along the lines of what was going on in 2020, but now it feels like it's even more crystallized, right? Because Trump is now in power, and for somebody that, as you know, pays attention to
Mm,
nuance, I'm very careful about not overemphasizing and kind of like waving that flag too much, right? Because the problem with doing that is you ignore the people that are left behind, obviously, right? And so I definitely want to remain empathetic to the people that still care about social issues, gender issues, and like all of those things. It doesn't mean that those things are not going to be emphasized at all anymore, even though the rhetoric is suggesting that, right? So I'm not in that place where I kind of like denounce everything that's like DEI. There are some cases in which that still should very much apply, but it just took over the entire cultural periphery in a
yeah.
way that became very divisive. So it wasn't just Trump making it divisive. He, as a character, is divisive. But when people speak, and we can have a good, and I have platforms in which we can have open discussions about this. There was a time where you couldn't even talk about it because people were just so triggered
Not long
by
ago.
Trump. Yeah, people were just very, very triggered by it. But what I noticed in whenever I get to kind of the brass tacks of policies, foreign policy, economics, his relationship with the Fed, at the SEC, what he wants to do for entrepreneurship, tax plans, brass tacks. A lot of what people say come down to they don't bring up policy, they don't bring up anything from a pragmatic standpoint. It's something about his character, or I just don't like him, or it's something about the way that he speaks. And I like he talks weird. Like he does not like he's not a guy that you're like, man, he is not like a JD Vance or like an Obama with like, somebody that's like speaking with like a ton of charisma. He's I don't know, he definitely like commands the scene and commands the room, but it always comes down to the argument of somebody saying, well, I just don't really like him as a person, so it just becomes about him, and he's just not, maybe he's not a likable guy. But I think that's
To
part of the
some.
reason why it's become so divisive.
Yeah, to some. But I actually find him to be very charismatic.
Yeah, I mean,
in
I
it
do too. I mean,
in it.
I
I mean, he's super funny.
yeah,
He's very quick,
he's a
right?
marketing genius.
He's
I
a
mean,
marketing genius. I mean,
yeah.
I didn't even know, but MAGA was registered before he even ran for president in
Mm,
2016.
yeah.
It was at the, correspondence dinner where he got skewered by Obama, and he basically walked away from that dinner, and that was the moment apparently his ambition to be president was seated,
Yeah.
because he was seething in his seat, and that's when he registered it. So yeah, absolutely, marketing genius without a doubt. So going back to this notion of the golden age, right?
Mhm.
Or is it the start of the end? What's your optimistic view? Like, if we were to break it
Cool.
down between your optimistic view, your pessimistic view, and your realist view,
Okay.
what
Let
what what
me,
does that look like?
sure.
As
So,
someone who is from the valley, right?
mhm,
Who's very deep in AI, right? And we can talk about how AI is taking over the government, right? It's taking over politics. I think there's a lot to unpack there. But what's your view in terms of the optimistic view, the realist view, and the pessimistic view?
yeah, that's a great discussion. Great discussion. So I'll start with rounding out my point about a new chapter in American exceptionalism, in which we are in a moment in time where our economic future has bold ideas, renewed energy, which is a perspective that's rooted in this longstanding conviction that America's unique culture and what we were able to drive with the Industrial Revolution and now the digital revolution and now the AI revolution is also a culture of risk taking and venture capitalism, which is very much the foundation of innovation. And the optimistic view is that that will overcome a lot of the global challenges that people face, and that it's paving the way for a more prosperous, forward looking economy, and really encapsulates this positive outlook on our future that reflects both, historical inspiration and this transformative potential that I personally see in today's policy and entrepreneurial landscape. Okay, what's the other side of it? Like, why are other people feeling like it's the end of the world when you sit on the other side?
Hmm.
And it's super interesting how there's like literally a dimensional shift, right? Like, how come for Trump supporters, people feel like it's the golden age, we're entering this new phase of prosperity, but then for others, they literally feel like it's the end of the world and everything is going to crap. And let's look at the macro. I think a good rubric for this is Ray Dalio's view on the changing world order and why some people hypothesize that America is over. And I've talked to a lot of people, and some people more than others, about why they're not America first and why they feel like America is over. And Dalio emphasizes that the world order basically follows these long-term cycles, right? They're both economic debt cycles, they're geopolitical, and then they've also been observed throughout history. And he believes that, there's shifts in power that occur predictably when nations essentially go through these cycles, right? And so he argues that the US is nearing the end of this dominant cycle due to just debt alone, right? Wealth inequality, the increasing political polarization, like you've mentioned, and it's a lot of these challenges that he contends anyway that weakens the nation's global position over time, including the debasement of the dollar. We mentioned the debt cycle and then the rise of China, right? China's
Yeah.
economic rapid growth and strategic long-term planning as basically positioning it in this race to AI to overtake the US in its global influence.
Yeah, we
And
saw
then you
the
have
deep
numerous
seek.
initiatives like,
Yeah.
the debt cycles, like we had said, and then BRICS, obviously.
Yeah. But would you say Dalio is more of a his view is more of a pessimistic view?
I would.
It is.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
is, right?
well,
I mean,
like
you
it's
talk
all
about the
relative,
national
right?
debt. You're talking about political polarization. You're talking
Hmm.
about, you know, he talks about slowing productivity growth as well, right? He's talking about decline of global influence. But then he does say we need to do this. We need to. He does provide solutions, but he is looking at it from the end of the cycle.
Yeah,
Would you
totally.
agree?
And I agree. It is pessimistic for America, right? Which is
Yeah.
why I'm very careful about how I characterize this. I say America first, but I also know that I'm sitting in a bubble, right? Like, Does America's downfall mean that the globe will be better off? I am not an economist, and so I can't speak to that. Will it be good for China overall? Absolutely. Because if they centralize their own power and take manufacturing, the supply chain, all of what, all of the cards that they have stacked with them on their side and the aces that they have on their sleeve, they can seize power in a
Yeah, but
very significant way.
who's gonna buy all their widgets?
Exactly. Exactly. Right. So, America as a consumptive force, right? So GDP alone and our buying power is really the power of the people that we're talking about here, and that's really what's going to drive economies. But I kind of want to draw a finer point on that because you wanted to contrast, like a positive and
Optimistic, realist,
an
and the
optimistic
best.
and a realist. I just want to contrast just the temperament and the tone. And I really want to gauge people's opinion about like the last 10 years. And if people are really feeling like, yeah, the last 10 years have been amazing, right? Like, who can say that? Like during COVID times, like even a little before then, like who is actually like you tell me, like you're sitting kind of outside the bubble, right? Like, we're people in the US like rah rah, like this is a really wonderful era. I can honestly say that especially the last 5 years have been like really rough. Like I don't feel like a sense of camaraderie and patriotism. And then especially as it impacts things that I can speak to, which is like increased regulatory burdens on entrepreneurship, especially when, you have things like debanking and stricter banking regulations, where Biden's policies have essentially imposed tighter regulatory oversight on financial institutions. This is taking a step back. This is a practice where banks basically restrict or cut off services to emerging companies, particularly in the crypto and fintech sectors, right?
Yeah,
Enhanced,
Andreessen
yeah,
was talking about that in
right,
Rogan's podcast. Like
totally,
he really went deep into the rabbit hole to just uncover so many of the companies that they've invested in, where the
yes.
founders got debanked. Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. So you did hear about this. It stifles risk taking, right? So entrepreneurship in general, now there's like an increased focus on, compliance and risk mitigation. But when Biden overemphasized that, it just led to, a conservative financial environment. We're seeing things also with the SEC. And, we can get into US aid and Doge and what Elon is doing just to bring transparency to government and how government is spending money and where your tax dollars is going. And then we can definitely talk about the controversial aspects of what good is this doing versus, hey, you have a patient on the operating table with open heart surgery, let's make sure that the patient doesn't die while we're doing this, right? So there's questions. I'm
who's the
not
patient? Who's the patient?
America. America's the patient. American government, like the US federal government. I would argue also the state, right? And just looking at how the money is flowing with respect to this institution. So
This,
yeah,
yeah, and the debt that the 34,
yeah,
what is it, 35 trillion dollars. I mean, it's a time
totally.
bomb. Yeah,
Yeah, no, for sure. And
yeah.
so when I look at this view that, again, I'm very aware that this is business centric, capitalist centric, Silicon Valley centric, these policies that I know not everybody can get behind. But if you're emphasizing cutting the bureaucratic red tape, lowering regulatory burdens, which basically expand access to what we're talking about here, which is banking services for startups, right? Because I'm a startup guy. You're a startup guy. I am all about people starting their own companies and building generational wealth for themselves, especially in a world of AI. What else do you need on top of that? You need tax cuts and incentives, tax reform, basically including lower corporate and capital gains taxes for crypto when you're bringing a lot of those things onshore, right? And then providing entrepreneurs with greater capital and higher incentives to invest in innovation and new ventures, especially in the venture capital space that fuels the tank for all of these innovations. You just don't have that kind of tolerance elsewhere. Basically, you're funding failure, right? So for every success, you probably have 99 failures, and you're basically gaming that kind of system and basically pumping a lot of capital through the system so that you can have the ecosystem work much better for it and for entrepreneurs in general.
Yeah. What's your optimistic, pessimist, and realist view on this? What's the soundbite as an optimist? Or let's
Hasn't
start with the soundbite for a pessimist. Like, what would that
okay.
look like?
Well, the soundbite for the pessimist would be, this is a hot take too. I realize that this is a hot take, and this is all
That's all we
speculative.
do in this show. Hot
Yeah, it's
takes.
just pure hot takes. I hesitate to speak on things that I don't have core evidence for, but I can empathize with the other view that Trump is just another puppet, and that there's something going on that we can't see. Call it the forces that be, the Illuminati or whatever, like
Is
the
that the deep
true
state? Is that, would you call
the
that?
deep state. Yeah, yeah. Well,
But isn't
so
that the? But
there's
isn't
two
that
takes
what's
on the deep
being
state.
defunded right now? With
Exactly, exactly.
yeah.
So I'd like to believe, and I am not, and I don't have perfect vision on this, is that that's the reason why Trump has initiated and implemented the operations that he has, is to dismantle the deep state, the corrupt government. I'd like to believe that he truly intends, even if it was, for purely narcissistic reasons, that he wants to kind of make the case and put his mark in history. But there's others that believe that he's just another, the other side of the coin, and the other wing to the bird, which is there's somebody else in power that put him in that place, and it's the same system, and corruption's not going to go away, and it's just going to be another brand of corruption in this new power, and will essentially seize world control from that same perspective, right?
Okay.
And they would throw Elon in this camp too, right? It's just a different brand of new world order, right? And so that's the pessimistic view, is that he doesn't intend
Nothing
to make
changes.
America great. Nothing
Yeah.
changes, right?
Nothing changes. It's
And
more of the
so
same. More
it's
of the
more of the
corruption.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah, more of
Maybe
the
slow
same.
down. Maybe it slows down,
Yeah.
but you're not able to really eliminate it at the root.
And maybe it's a bait and switch, right? Maybe it's a bait and switch of like, yeah, a lot of people believe that this is happening, but you're just putting new players within the same bureaucratic, corrupt system that's going to milk that same system and then continue to extract from the American people. What I'd like to believe, and I feel the sentiment is from the people that did vote for Trump, is that there is a signal of change. You're putting people in place that have a genuine integrity that we haven't seen before. And you look at the team, right? From the Viveks of the world to Tulsi Gabbard to Elon to Vance, and then even the people that are getting involved in the administration, like David Sachs, and these are Silicon Valley guys, right? But what you're
Yeah.
seeing and what they've been over communicating is an incredible competence, and an incredible competence that we do see in entrepreneurial spirits that's been generated in Silicon Valley. Is just like, what does a CEO do? Is you're
Yeah.
fighting fires and you're working 20 hours a day, and you have kids that are 18, 19 years old at
We're not
Doge trying
normal.
to audit the system,
Yeah.
staying up late on a Friday night, and these government workers don't know what to do with that. And they're like, well, we're not used to people coming into work, let alone
Yeah.
staying in on a Friday night.
Yeah.
So things like
You
that.
need
Incredible
access to the
competence.
building. How do we give
Yeah.
you want to work?
So
we don't
so
do
take
that
it,
here.
yeah. So take it for what it is. It's, to me, it's signaling an incredible amount of competence. And if you're exposing the wires, and there's that transparent view, and Elon is posting about it every day, right? Regardless of how you feel about Elon. And we haven't even gotten into Bobby Kennedy yet, right? And so,
I
okay,
saw
let's
that
take a look
today. He
at
got
this.
sworn in.
That's right. So let's take a look at the food pyramid. Let's look at transformative vision, like his transformative vision for public health, environmental and preventative focus on the things that have been killing us, toxins and pollution, the key factors that basically contribute to chronic disease, investment in public health infrastructure, the education and community empowerment, and all of these things, not to mention Joel Salatin's strategy for operationalizing health priorities and things like that, and more of these data-driven outcome-based models. You believe in the science. So far, so good, like cautiously optimistic. What can I do? Right? Like, is there, like, what can I say to that? Like, do I say, no, that F that, that's not going to work for us? let's go back to like cancel culture because that was working
Yeah.
better. Like show me
Yeah.
a better model. Like show me a better model than what's happening right now, which is
Yeah.
incredible competence, incredible transparency, incredible action, like a default to action in wanting to get stuff done. It's kind of what I recognize, and again, we recognize as entrepreneurs because we
Yeah.
get stuff done,
Done. Yeah.
and we
That's
get
what we
stuff
do.
done in
No
a short
problems.
amount of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell me what works better. I'm open to it.
Yeah.
Is where I'm at.
So what's the optimistic view? What does that look
Well,
like?
sure. So in terms of the optimistic view, I feel like this second
And
term would
I
essentially,
think you're in
yeah,
a really unique position, right?
totally, yeah,
To really speak to this because you're an immigrant, grew up in the valley. You're an outsider, but then an insider. And so you're really seeing this from a very holistic perspective.
hmm
Would you say you were a Democrat
I
back
was,
in the day? You
yeah,
were.
I was a registered Democrat. I was.
You're a registered Democrat, right? So
That's right.
your perspective is really interesting because you've gone full circle,
hmm
right? And you're an entrepreneur, and everyone or most people who listen to this show are entrepreneurs.
Right.
Uh, so what's your optimistic view of where America goes from here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a lot of what I had touched on before. It's really a vision of hope, right? And what this new renewed sense of optimism brings is kind of like, what's the all hands on deck version for this, especially when we have to be very careful about, you know, a dozen companies controlling the technology that's going to usher humanity into this new era of digital sovereignty, right? And so, and I'm talking about AI specifically. And so we can hope that with transparency, incredible radical transparency, radical integrity. I'm going to add radical integrity there. Very astute conservative fiscal policy. I'm going to leave social issues off the table because I just don't want to touch that. That's just like dynamite. So I stick to the things that I know, which is fiscal policy, economics, technology innovation, and entrepreneurship. And those are the things that I prioritize in what I hope this country could represent. Could it mean an entirely new digital infrastructure? Could it mean new markets? Could it mean new opportunities for ways to make money at the individual level, new opportunities for startups, growth? I'm hoping that that's what this encapsulates is something very similar to what you and I experienced in 1997 to 2005, right? This incredible flourishing around the internet and what the web represented. Obviously, there's going to need to be policy and political instrumentation that needs to take place where you do need alignment. And so I immediately like raise question marks. You think about ways to be to criticize current positions, right? So why didn't the US or the UK endorse what was going on at the AI Action Summit in Paris? Why didn't they get on board with everybody else, right? So for some reason, the UK and the US are kind of like a little bit standoffish. And you know,
Yeah.
if that comes with a lot of regulation, because regulation is needed in order to centralize operations, right? You can't just have like this freewheeling, everybody can do whatever. Like you need both. And we always say that you need both. You need both control and freedom in order to accelerate growth. You
Yeah.
need the friction points in order to understand that the flows need to happen, but you need to regulate those flows, especially when it comes to economics, when it comes to data, when it comes to technology innovation. And so the promise is that it unlocks economic opportunity for all. And then even tapping into some of the woo-woo aspects of it, like could this mean a new era of abundance for people? And then what does that kind of abundance mean for people in terms of opportunity and economic prosperity?
Very well said. I speak to a lot of parents who have kids that are of that age where they're now starting to think about college, and I hear a lot of parents say, there's something about America. I just don't want to send my kids to America right now. Like I feel like it's a nation that's lost. It's lost its way. But the reality is America has been counted out before time and time again, right?
Mhm.
Every generation thinks that their problems are the problems that are going to end or that will end the country. but if you see it, like America has reinvented itself time and time again, right? And we can actually predict the death of America for the last 100 years, right? From like the Great Depression, like that was supposed to be the end, right? Then you had the 70s was a really hard time, right? Vietnam, Watergate, people thought America basically had peaked, right? And then you have the 2000, like, 9/11. Then you had the financial crisis in 2008, right? Many claim that like that was the end of the American century. But every single time, America's actually bounced back even stronger. Every single time. I mean, history shows that the US is incredibly resilient. But reinvention, and I think that's what you're speaking to, right?
Sure.
Reinvention or coming up with a new model doesn't happen automatically, right? It requires leadership, it requires vision, and the willingness of the people to adapt, right? And there is going to be chaos along the way, of course, because change is hard. It's really hard, but it's necessary. Like you said, like if the patient is on the, what did you say? The operating table?
The operating table. Yeah.
The operating table. Yeah. It's going to be painful. You're going to have to make some hard decisions.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And I do want to touch on a personal note, and I'm glad you brought it up. And I feel like I'm, kind of bearing my heart a little bit. And this is where I get a little bit emotional about it, because I didn't realize how much of a patriot I was until, let's say, COVID times. And, I started to see things start to unravel a little bit. And the people that have a distinct POV to myself, those people, and I'm not going to oversimplify. I hate kind of like broad sweeping statements about all people, right? Because there's always nuance. And so, part of our cognitive architecture is such that we can make, some nuanced statements, but then sweeping views, you always get into trouble. But the people that have opposing views to me tended not to be immigrants. Like you had said, I was born in Quezon City, immigrated here with my mom when I was like 6 years old. My mom and I worked very hard to get to where we are with respect to even just having autonomy and the freedom. And so the day that, I became a citizen was very emotional for me. The day that my mom became a citizen was, because she became a citizen after me, was even more so emotional. And even then it didn't kick in. It started to kick in when people would just rag on America, and the very people that took advantage, that take advantage of the privileges of living here and the tremendous quality of life that we have here, are burning flags and ragging on America and saying, America should go down in flames. The eagle has died, things like that. And it rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't know why. And it was a visceral reaction. It wasn't an intellectual one. It was very much like, why would you want the downfall of America? And that's when I realized, like, hey, you know what? I'm a patriot. Like I'm America first, and I'm not going to be afraid to say it anymore, because it's like, wait a second, I'm not allowed to say that. Like when I say America first, or I support Trump, then like I'm like canceled. Like, why is that? That's not right. So things like that just kind of pushed me. It pushed my buttons the wrong way, and that's why it just feels like a breath of fresh air, that at least I could speak freely now again.
Yeah.
Right.
I can sense this from your voice. I can and see it in your eyes. You could feel this sense of relief that, it's okay to talk about it, because for a long time you couldn't. And like you said, I think a lot of those people also who call, the end or the death to America, the eagle, all of that rhetoric, I think is also who didn't really have to go through what you went through to be in the position that you're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and when I talk to a lot of people who are immigrants, they're like, like this country has done so much for me, for my family. Why would I call, the end of America or death to America? But it's not just a U.S. American centric thing, right? Because if we look at it globally, a thriving, a prosperous, a strong United States is actually really good for the world.
Totally.
And I know I'm just saying that in a very flippant way, but I mean, I'm not an economist, but I will venture to say that, when America is in decline, I think we've got serious security challenges around the world. We will
Sure.
have economic challenges around the world. We will have social challenges around the world. And I mean, I'm sure there are books written on this. And yeah, and so I think it's in everyone's vested interest globally as global citizens that America wins.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a, and then you think about it, well, is it zero sum? No, it doesn't have to be. I think the
Mm-mm.
whole world can win. Yeah, I mean, that's a very utopian way to see things, but what's the alternative, right?
Right.
What's the alternative? I think if I mean, there are a lot of views here. I mean, we're getting into, territory that can be very controversial, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Uh, all right, Nix, thank you for sharing that. That was, I appreciate it. We've had this conversation, offline in the past, but I don't think we've ever had it online.
Hey there. We're taking a quick break from the show to let you know that if you'd like to invite Dirain or Nikos to speak at your next event on topics ranging from emergence and the inner game to the future of AI, we've got you covered. Simply email us at info@emergencenowpod.com. Once again, that's info@emergencenowpod.com. Now, let's dive back to the show.
All right, let's switch gears. I want to talk about who's really running the country right now. I mean, there's, I don't know if you saw, I'm sure you saw, again, one of those things you can't escape. Elon and X, in the Oval Office, giving a 30-minute interview. Like, who's really running the show? Is it the politicians or is it the Valley, the guys, the tech guys, the tech bros?
Put those
What's
guys
going
in
on?
charge, man. Put those guys in charge.
Yeah.
Again, regardless of
Who's
how
running the
you
show?
regardless of how you feel about Elon and what's going on, just with respect to the things that you're seeing in the news, right? The investigative push, USAID is just like, the big one right now going on. And I think it was Mike Pence. He was a former State Department official that was on Rogan recently. And I kind of went into like a mini rabbit hole about like all of the evidence that he's been bringing, just with respect to freedom of speech and USAID and the misuse of funds and, the illegitimacy of operational conduct with like the hundreds of NGOs around the world in which the money was like kind of being floated through, right? And so it's aggressive with respect to Doge's autonomy and the very aggressive audits and security actions that are being placed in each branch of the government. And so who's in charge? It feels like it's a collaboration between the executive branch and Doge, for sure. That's why you're getting pushbacks. And, I don't know if this is entirely true, but the number of searches for criminal defense attorneys within the region of DC spiked up like 3x or something like that. So it's like, all right, like, I mean, this is just, Trump has been saying this since 2017, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
drain the swamp. Like, there's so much corruption in the government. Let's just drain it all. And so it's just, it feels like he's been incredibly transparent. And to my understanding, and again, limited knowledge, never met the guy, just seen him on TV like everybody else. He's as genuine as he is in public as he is in private, and he'll say the exact same thing. He's not duplicitous. I get the sense, that Elon is the most cunning business genius that exists today. Does he have, like this? Is he seeing a board that we're not seeing? Of course. But, what he's been conveying, and I can only speak to what he's been conveying, is that there's integrity there, like what I've been saying, and that, the implications for US foreign policy and public trust go hand in hand with what we're talking about here. So who's in charge? It seems like a combined effort between, Doge, like you said, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and the executive branch so far.
What I find really interesting is the future of power, right? Because historically, governments have been really, really slow,
Yeah.
right? And tech is the opposite. Like it moves in lightning speed, right? So,
right.
But once upon a time, not long ago, governments ran the world. But I feel like today it's shifting. The power is definitely shifting, and it almost feels like we're watching government versus tech, right? And there's a complete total speed mismatch. I mean, some people say AI is being weaponized against government,
Yeah.
against politics. Is it being weaponized to reveal, the inefficiency and the corruption and the abuse? Or is it being weaponized to completely take over and start conditioning and shaping how we think and this new world order? I mean, we saw all that deep fake stuff going around during the elections, right? So like I don't want that to happen, right? So how do we draw a fine line between, this battle between government, because we don't want a corrupt government, right? We want a government that's fair, that's transparent, that's for the people, by the people, right? You don't want to have to wonder about, a politician who on paper makes $200,000 but has a net worth of 300 million or something, right? Like, how does that even happen, right? Uh,
Well, I don't know. I think it's a little more complicated than that. I think there's evidence now that a lot of people would argue that the government has historically weaponized technology against the people. The U.S. being first and foremost there, and the example there is COVID, and it being in cahoots with pharmaceutical companies. A view that was once very controversial in 2020, 2021, that now it's becoming very clear that USAID and those particular organizations were funding specific government agencies to either operationalize policies to reprimand media and tech companies from particular businesses that didn't fall in line with their current narrative. And so that became a little bit more clear with, again, the evidence, as Mike Benz posited, and I don't have them in hand. Maybe we should supply some links. Again, do your own research, right? This is just two guys on the internet, like riffing off of the information that we have. So I don't want to misrepresent anything. But my view is that government has led in a ton of innovation efforts and R&D on the most advanced technologies, and even the internet came from the government, right? So tech became its own thing. It became its own behemoth. The institution and the operationalization of tech within government continues to be slow in terms of like the bureaucracy, the pencil pushing, and like, DMV websites that continue to be like non-user friendly and things like that. So the application of those technologies is asymmetric relative to the speed at which technology is moving the world today. AI being the prime example of that. But I would also argue that government has been weaponizing technology, especially media technology, for a very long time.
Yeah, I see that. What worries me now is that there's been a lot of talk about deep state. And you're right. I mean, government's been using technology for a very long time. But now I feel like, the government that was using technology for a long time against the people are now being controlled by that very technology. And so then I ask, well, what's really going on? I feel like there's this new kind of shadow governance that's emerging. I mean, simple example is, an unelected tech billionaire, also known as Elon, right? Making decisions that affect billions of people.
Sure.
Yes, there's transparency. And yes, there's the mission is very clear, right? The mandate is very clear. But where does it end? Like, is this the new normal? Is this
Mhm.
are we uninstalling deep state and installing shadow governance?
And I think that is the hot take on Elon, right? Is that
Yeah.
he says that he's pro humanity, that he's interstellar, that he's I was really moved, as early as 2017 when he made a surprise appearance on the stage of South by Southwest, and like right at the midst of his first SpaceX launches, successful ones rather, and he said, the Earth is the cradle of humanity, and we need to care for it, and he like cried on stage, and it was very very moving. And that's when I thought he was like he had a big heart, right? Has that changed, in almost 10 years? Has he been planting the seeds for, this true new world order? And is he part of the deep state Illuminati crew that's now been put in a position to run that new world organization and install these neural links in your brain to control you for further extraction? I don't know, man. Like, I just don't know. It's kind of beyond my purview. Again, what I can do is I can hope and I can maintain the level of awareness to just be cognizant of these things. But yeah, it's crystal clear that he's making some pretty big decisions, and he's the big guy has got his ear, right? So, or he's got the ear of the big guy rather. So it's just time will tell. Time will tell.
Who's the big guy? Who's the real big guy?
Yeah, who's the real big guy? Who's like the puppet master, right?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, is that like we still don't know who's like absolutely in power. They're the men in pajamas that are running the world, and we only see kind of what we're meant to see. So that's where it gets off the rails fairly quickly with those with those theories. Yeah.
Cool. All right, that's the show.
Love it.
We'll catch you guys next week. And if you enjoy this conversation, hit that like or subscribe button, and we'll catch you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Emergence Now, where we explore the emerging trends, technologies, and ideas that are shaping our world today for you to discover yourself. We hope you enjoyed this episode and gained valuable insights that you can apply in your own life. If you want to stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we share additional content, engage with our community, and keep the conversation going. Thanks again for listening to Emergence Now, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode.